We will be exploring the sun's daily pattern in the sky throughout different seasons and how these changes affect how well our solar panels produce electricity. Insolation is the Earth's incoming solar radiation. The sun gives us two types of energy: light energy and heat energy. Insolation is the main source of energy on our planet. It is responsible for the variation we have in temperature during different seasons and in different places around the world. The amount of insolation an area receives depends on where we are located, the season, and the time of day. Our Earth is a sphere that rotates in space around the sun. As the Earth rotates, we experience both daytime and nighttime. When the Earth is facing the sun, we have daytime. When we are facing away from the sun, we experience nighttime. Different places on Earth receive different amounts of insolation. If we are somewhere with longer hours of daylight, and if the sun's rays reach us more directly, then we have more insolation. When the Earth is facing the sun, we have daytime. The more hours of daylight we have, the more insolation there is. The amount of daylight varies depending on the seasons. During some seasons, we get more hours of sunlight, while in others, we have less. We have four seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. In the summer, our Earth is tilted towards the sun, as shown in the picture. We get more hours of sunlight during the summer, which is also why it is hotter in the summertime. On the other hand, in the winter, our Earth is tilted away from the sun, as the image on the right shows. We have less hours of sunlight in the winter, which is why it is so much colder. What are some other patterns you have noticed during our different seasons of winter and summer? In the winter, we have fewer hours of daylight, meaning we have less insolation. For example, have you ever noticed that in December it gets dark outside at about 4:30 p.m.? But then during the summer, we have more hours of daylight and the sun sets at about 8 p.m. Since we have longer days in the summer, we also have more insolation. Now that we have talked about our seasons and how different seasons affect how much insolation an area receives, we will move on to better understand how the angle of the sun's rays impacts how much insolation we have. The angle of insolation is the angle the sun's rays make when they hit Earth's surface. Places on Earth that are closer to the equator receive more direct sunlight at a straight angle. The more direct the angle of insolation, the more insolation there is. As shown here in the image, the further you move away from the equator, the less direct angle of insolation. Therefore, the less insolation we have. Places closer to the equator, like cities in Ecuador, get more insolation than we have here in New York, since we are further away from the equator. The image shows this pattern. The most insolation occurs at or near the equator. As you move away from the equator, the amount of insolation decreases. These two images show how we also have changes in our angle of insolation during different seasons. In the summer, the sun is higher in the sky, so we have a more direct angle of insolation. For us in New York, it is not as direct as if we were at the equator, but it is more direct compared to the angle in the winter. Now that we know a bit more about insolation, we will learn how the amount of electricity solar panels produce is also affected by insolation. Solar panels use the sun's insolation to produce electricity. The more insolation, the more electricity a solar panel can produce. Here in New York, since we are further from the equator, we have a lower angle of insolation. During our seasons, we have more insolation in the summer and less in the winter. Since solar panels use sunlight to make electricity, they work best in the summertime. With our goal of producing the most amount of electricity, it is important to understand how insolation affects solar panels. Determining which is the best angle and position to install our solar panels can help us maximize how much electricity they make. Engineers who work in the solar industry figure out the best way to install solar panels so they receive the most direct insolation and produce the most electricity. Looking at these three images of possible ways to install solar panels, which do you think would be the best to produce electricity? While all three of these solar panels are making some amount of electricity, our panel on the right would make the most electricity. By tilting the solar panel up off the roof to better face the sun's rays, we are getting a more direct angle of insolation. Therefore, the solar panel can make more electricity.